And we have James P. Farwell, and we're going to be talking for about 10, 15 minutes about U.S. politics. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to share it so everybody can see. So James. James is a expert, a political consultant and author, and he's both a local and national political consultant. And real quick, your book, why don't you give us the name of it and just a short skinny about what it's about, and then we'll get going.
Well, thanks for asking. It's called Persuasion and Power. It can be obtained through Amazon. It's gotten 5-star reviews. And it looks at how people through history, from Julius Caesar through Ronald Reagan and Barack Obama, have used information strategy to jockey for power. Mark Twain once said that history doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes. And this book really shows how that happens. Obama uses a modern technology, for example, to reach people through social media, but his mindset is really no different at all from that which Martin Luther used for the Reformation. We think in terms of mass media being something that's new, but the person who actually initiated the idea of using newspapers for propaganda was Napoleon, and the person who first started using movies for propaganda was Lenin. And the guy that came up with the idea of using television for propaganda, interestingly enough, was Hitler in 1936, although they didn't develop it because they wound up going to war. So it's an interesting book and has a lot to say about current political personalities and how they operate, and about what you need to do in order to persuade people in order to obtain power. And again, the name of the book is Persuasion and Power, and it's on Amazon, published by Georgetown University Press.
Okay.
Thanks for asking.
No problem. Thank you very much. Okay, so presidential politics first. Today's a pretty big day. There's some big news. And of course, we have the Obamacare discussion with the premiums. But today, WikiLeaks, another drop. And so what's happened with that in terms of the margins?
I do not think that it will affect the presidential race. Hillary Clinton continues to maintain roughly a 5 to 7 point lead over Trump when you average these polls. And if anything, I think yesterday could be widened slightly. And at the same time, one of the curious things is that despite the fact that Trump says it's worth $10 billion, he is not using any of his money to try and even the playing field that he says has been stacked against him by the media, which makes me wonder just how serious he really is. It's a curious phenomenon. I think one of the reasons the media is starting to cover a little bit more of the email stuff with Bill Clinton is that they're now satisfied that she's going to win, and now that she's going to win, they do what they always do, which is turn on their own and start to devour them. But I don't think it'll affect the outcome of the election. I think that she has a solid lead, and I just don't see any scenario realistically in which Trump is going to overcome that, unless it turns out that alien abductions are real, in which case I suppose anything is possible. But I don't think they're real, so I tend to rule out that possibility.
Have there been any polls that you've seen today? I know there were a bunch of polls yesterday, Wednesday, and I think probably the most favorable to Donald Trump was the Fox News poll, which actually
was, I think, 4 points or something like that. The average in these in the polls have been fairly consistent, and that is that she's basically maintaining a 5 to 7 point lead over him. We talked about this before. The problem you've got to focus on with Trump is this one. This is the number. Can he actually break 41%? That seems to be about as high as he has gotten. She goes up and down, which is one of the reasons there's some fluctuation in the polling. But he tends to range between 37 and 41% in these polls. And I don't see any evidence in any polling that he's getting much beyond that. You may get an outlier every now and then that does, but fundamentally it seems to have the base of about 38 to 41%, depending upon who votes. His theory is that like Brexit, like the elections for the mayor of Rome, like the Iceland elections, like the Columbia referendum on the FARC settlement, where the polling all showed a different outcome than we saw, that the same thing is going to happen here. You and I talked about this yesterday. I don't see that. I think in those cases, there was a very clear rationale articulated by people who eventually won the election that is missing from the Trump campaign. He's not only not making a cogent case for why he should be president, he's not even making a cogent case for why she should not be president. And just speaking as a political consultant, I think that tends to lengthen the odds of the person winning an election. I mean, he's got a bad campaign.
Yeah. I mean, certainly he steps on his message. I mean, that's the word that is being used all the time by people on TV elsewhere. And has he stepped on anything today that you're aware of?
Depends upon whether he opened his mouth and said anything.
Right.
As you know perfectly well, I'm very skeptical about Trump as a candidate. And you know, the interesting thing is that the problems he has in this election are for the most part self-inflicted. He really has nobody but himself to blame for it.
Now, as we've mentioned before, you're a Republican consultant. And so you're not all that crazy, obviously, about Donald Trump. And I'm assuming that there's a lot of other Republicans, a lot of Republicans running for office who might get burnt by maintaining the support of Donald Trump? Or do you think maybe the polls may narrow and maybe they might be able to squeak by?
Well, you're right. I mean, I advised John Kasich in his presidential campaign, as you know, and he was a pleasure to work with and a great Republican.
Sure.
And I had given, before joining the Kasich campaign, some advice to Jeb Bush, and I personally also liked that Kasich was a really formidable candidate who would easily have won this election. So would Marco Rubio, so would Jeb Bush and some others. The Senate is the only thing that's in play, and I think that's going to be close. And I think we're not going to know until the last week. And, you know, the interesting thing is it may depend to some extent on whether or not voters really think that she's going to win. If everybody thinks that she's going to win, that would, I think, tend to help down ballot races for Republicans, because American voters, generally speaking, have not wanted to provide absolute power to any party. So if you're going to have the White House, voters tend to lean towards giving Congress to the other party. I do think it's possible that the Democrats could take the Senate. They could get 51, 52 seats. They could wind up with 48 seats. They could wind up with a 50-50 tie, but that's the range that you're looking at. I suppose that if she achieved a real blowout and won this thing by 15 points, which is a bit larger than I would have expected,
sure,
anything would be possible. And, you know, one of the things that's up in the air is what happens in Louisiana. I've been predicting that Kennedy would make a runoff with Campbell, which is what Bernie Pinsonet's poll also showed. But we both know the math in the state. Maryland, you got 44%. And if you divide that up between what Campbell is polling and what Carolyn Fayard has the potential to get, in theory, you could get both of them getting 19, 20%. And with so many Republicans in the race, mathematically, it becomes possible to have two Democrats in the runoff. None of the polling is showing that, but the polls that you and I have seen in Louisiana have been all over the board. There's no real consistency between them. It depends on who's taking the poll. But Louisiana can make a difference in the final outcome.
Getting back to the presidential race again for a second, and the impact of the Obamacare premiums is, I mean, that's got to have some kind of impact. I mean, you'd be talking about going up 25%. I just got finished doing an interview with Jason Pye of FreedomWorks, and very interesting discussion. You know, he's communications director of FreedomWorks. They're a conservative organization, and you know, obviously, you know, he contends that this is really the Democrats' Achilles heel. But the one thing that I brought up to him that, you know, he really could not say negate, and that is that it's going to be very difficult to repeal and replace Obamacare, assuming that the Republicans take all. because in doing so, and you're an attorney, in doing so, basically, once you repeal something, the law ends. Legislation.
Well, what you would do, if you were going to be prudent, what you would do is you would amend the current law and fix the problems that you think are there. It's not clear to me that the political consensus exists to really do a whole lot. And certainly, since I think Hillary Clinton is going to be elected president, then the answer is that nothing's going to happen because she would veto any changes that she disagrees with. I also think that as a factor in the election, it's possible that it could have an effect, let's say, in a House race, maybe in a Senate race, but the presidential race is taking up all the oxygen in the air. People are just not paying any attention to anything except the presidential race, and they are glued to the presidential race. The blow up between Newt Gingrich and Megyn Kelly is just emblematic of the emotions. You and I talk to people all the time, and I think you and I would both agree that it's rare. Probably we have to go back to the Duke Edwards race in 1991 that we've seen so much emotion driving an election.
Let's see. I can think of the Louisiana governor's race. I can think of Louisiana U.S. Senate race. Both of those I think were very, very emotional. Contrast that to the U.S. Senate race now to replace David Duke. So
no emotion at all. I have not had one person other than you or other friends who are insiders in politics even bring up the topic. People like you and I and Ron Fauché and other friends of ours discuss it all the time because we're junkies. But it's not something that I've ever had anybody at any party or any meeting or anything else ever even ask me about. I get asked about the presidential race by everybody.
Sure.
No, I'm just saying I think that picks up all the oxygen.
Sure.
And the things are very, very interested in that race. It's not that they don't care about the other races, but that's not a top of mind topic. They want to talk about Trump and Clinton.
Right. And, since you mentioned Megyn Kelly and Gingrich, and also taking up all the oxygen, I'm just wondering, is the issue of sex and sexual battery, is that taking up too much of the oxygen, or is the press making too much of that? I have my own feelings, but I just want to throw it out to you.
Well, if there's one thing that anybody who has ever studied the media will tell you, it is that sex is something that readers and viewers tend to be interested in. Why do you think that all of these tabloids do as well as they do? And they're very interested, of course, in what Hollywood stars are up to. I think that in the case of Kelly's interview, I saw the interview, and I think that the reporting on it has been misconstrued. Newt was not defending Trump's behavior. As you know, I have advised him politically.
Right.
He and I disagree in the presidential race. He's for Trump, and I'm against Trump. But he had no intention of trying to cover for and defend Trump's behavior. He was only making the point that in his view, the media coverage has been one-sided, that Trump has his problems, but she has her problems, and that it's unfair that the media is not covering her. It's not how the press has portrayed the interview. It isn't the way it's being spun, but it is what happened in the interview. And I think it's not just one thing. I think it's everything put together. I don't think you can deconstruct this election. It all comes down to the assessment people have of Trump and Hillary Clinton as individuals, rather than, for the most part, what positions they're taking on a specific issue.
Right.
Remember that the polling shows that over half, and some polls will say 2/3 of American voters actively dislike both of these candidates. Mm-hmm. And dislike, as we both know, is a big motivator for a lot of voters. And that's what I think you see happening here. The allegations of misbehavior by Trump or Bill Clinton or Hillary Clinton's role is just one element in that discussion.
So it's an election really not about the issues, as you said. It's really an issue of personalities and trust. Obviously, I'm a no Trumper, and I look at him as somebody that I just cannot imagine being in the White House. But obviously, there are people who definitely feel the same way about Hillary Clinton. I was,
Sure.
yeah, go on.
Well, I think the thing to remember, and this is why Trump is still in the race, is that this is a change election. And what people really do want in Washington is fundamental change. Trump is the candidate who presents himself as the agent of change. And Hillary Clinton, by any standard, would be the candidate of the establishment. The question would be, of course, is Trump a credible agent for change? As a Republican, I would prefer to have a Republican president. We had a handful of people that I think would have been excellent presidents who vied for nomination. But for better or worse, in fairness to Trump, he read the Republican electorate better than any of them did. And that's why he won the nomination. He won it. He won that nomination fair and square. I didn't support it and wasn't happy with the outcome, but you have to give credit where credit's due. But of course, what Trump never did was think about what it would take to win a general election, because he's not interested really in issues. He doesn't know anything about the issues. He doesn't prepare for anything. We've talked about this before. The idea that this man could go into these debates without bothering to prepare for it is appalling. What would he do going into a meeting with Putin or having a meeting with NATO or dealing with the drug wars in Mexico? Go into a meeting to have, whether it's with Congress or a foreign leader or you name it, and be unprepared? What are the chances that that would work out? He prides himself on being a negotiator, but good negotiators usually know what they're talking about. And when it comes to public issues, the blunt truth of the matter is that he doesn't. And I think that's too bad for the Republican Party that we have a nominee like that. I'm not apologetic in my criticism of him.
Sure. So we have 13 days left, roughly. Is it 12 or 13? I lost count. So I guess my very last question is this, two parts. Number one is, with less than 2 weeks, if you were representing, say, Trump, what would your message be to him? And secondly, if you were representing Clinton?
Well, if I were Clinton, I'd do exactly what I'm doing. I think that her she is not a good candidate, and I don't think that anybody in her campaign would argue that she's a good candidate. What they argue is that she'd be a good public servant. Her campaign has not been responsible for taking Donald Trump down, and what she's doing is fine. Mainly, she's staying out of sight. Trump, it seems to me, if he were serious, if he's got the money that he claims that he has, would take $100 million, put it in 10 battleground states, and use that to get out his message, both about himself and about Hillary Clinton. I think it's very striking that for all of his pretense, he's not doing that. And that tells you something about the kind of person that he is. And it makes me wonder whether or not he's really serious about this. I don't know that $100 million would make any difference at this point, but clearly that would be the play that you'd make if you were in his position. It would be the correct strategy. Assuming he had the right television and assuming it was done right. And by the way, if he did that, he could offset the negative. He could offset the media coverage that he feels is so critical of him, because you can buy access to voters' attention, and it raises the question of whether he's telling the truth about how much he's worth. I have to wonder about that. The other thing, of course, that one wonders is that if I were Hillary Clinton and I wanted to have a Manchurian candidate become the Republican nominee, it would be very difficult to create a more perfect candidate than Donald Trump on her behalf. He was the absolutely ideal opponent. You couldn't dream up somebody who would have been a better opponent.
Okay, so listen, I know that you got to run.